Welcome back to another episode of the Light Up Your Metabolism podcast. Today we are talking about light and also other frequencies on the electromagnetic spectrum. Don't tune out yet. This is a much needed conversation with my guest today, Tristan Scott, who is an electrical engineer. And so he helps explain this whole electromagnetic spectrum, which, if you're anything like me, you feel a little intimidated by. But it's really, really important to understand this spectrum, to understand, number one, why our bodies are actually electric. I always say if you don't believe it, just stick your finger in a socket and you'll remember. So we are electric, and that means we are influenced by all sorts of electromagnetic frequencies that are around us. And let me tell you, these frequencies are around us, natural ones and unnatural ones. And it's really helpful to kind of just understand the basics. Even if you don't get every single word of what Tristan says in this episode, it's going to help you understand why things like sunlight and grounding are so beneficial to our health, and why things like frequencies from our cell phones and our Wi-Fi routers and even just the wiring in our walls can be harmful to our health. It helps us understand why that is. It helps us ground this, pun intended, into something we can understand, and then see why, oh wow, that would be why grounding is so impactful. That is why it makes such a difference when I get outside. And the good thing to know about basically all these podcasts that I've been doing about similar topics is that the takeaway is always get outside, be on your devices less, get in the sun, get your feet on the earth. That's the advice for all of these things. So we're just trying to fill in the why. And sometimes understanding the why helps us buy into why these practices are so essential, and why it goes from, for me at least, feeling like, well, food and, working out are so much more important than being grounded. Like, why would I waste my money on a pair of grounding shoes when, buying some, organic supplement is going to be much more powerful. Now I'm starting to think the other way around, that anything having to do with nature is going to be vastly more powerful, more regulating for our system, and more beneficial for the root cause of basically every health issue. So that being said, I want to tell you all about my guest today, Tristan Scott. He is an electrical engineer and the health marketing lead at Daylight Computer Company. He is an expert in the electromagnetic aspects of our biology and educates important topics such as light, EMFs, grounding, and eating a local seasonal diet. We didn't get into that today. There's so much to talk with him about. He's also the author of the book Bitcoin and Beef. You can find him on Instagram at Tristan_health. And he also has a podcast called Decentralized Radio. And he is co-host with Ryan, who was also, I interviewed him on this podcast too. So Tristan is a phenomenal speaker. He's great at explaining these concept topics. And so, if you usually listen to podcasts on 1.5 or 2.0 speed, you may need to slow this one down. And again, don't worry about understanding every single word. It's going to become abundantly clear. There are going to be loads and loads of takeaways that you are going to get from this episode, that are a lot of these things, like 99.9% of these things, are free. And he's going to talk about like how to set up your bedroom, little things you want to pay attention to, like things that are plugged in, and how to mitigate our exposure to some of the more harmful electromagnetic frequencies, and how to embrace the more health promoting ones. And that is why I loved this interview. So without any further ado, here's the interview with Tristan Scott. All right, Tristan, I'm super excited to welcome you to the Light Up Your Metabolism podcast. Thanks for taking the time to be here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited always to talk about light and health, and what we're going to get into today is I could talk about for hours, so it's a good problem to have.
Yeah, for sure. And I could learn about this stuff and talk about it for hours as well. So let's get started with your story. What brought you, I know you have a background as an electrical engineer, but you have many passions and interests and talents and lots of scope of knowledge. So walk us through, that story and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so went to school for electrical engineering. Even before then, was raised by a family that loved the outdoors. Hiking, camping, played a lot of sports growing up as well. Kind of lost touch with the outdoors a bit in college, playing soccer, but basically had one too many concussions at the end of my time in university and college, and forced me down a self-healing rabbit hole. So I realized the issues kind of like with our centralized healthcare system, didn't get any answers from neurologists, had post-concussive symptoms and syndrome for over a year, where, I went from an athlete and engineering student to not being able to exercise or, sleeping 12 hours just to kind of get by and graduate. So that was my reality, and I kind of didn't take that as my new normal. So started consuming a lot of health optimization information early on, and realized, we can make a drastic change in our lifestyle, or sorry, in our, day to day, how we're feeling with our lifestyle habits, diet, how we're prioritizing sleep, how we're, managing stress, of course, all the inputs. So that led me to, the surface level understanding of what's really important, everything from diet to the food system to, I bought a pair of blue light blocking glasses in 2018. That was one of the first biohacks I did. I was taking some supplements to help with brain healing, and fish oil was like a big one. And now I know so much about DHA that I didn't even understand back then. Red light, getting outside, prioritizing sleep, and grounding was another one. I had a grounding mat like early in 2019 or late 2018. It was just kind of like surface level understanding of a lot of this stuff. And then I got I started feeling better is kind of the shortcut answer from implementing a lot of these modalities. And it just took my health journey into my own hands and became obsessed, became hooked because I felt better. And I just wanted to continue to learn. So I was graduating, starting my new job, first, job out of college. And I was like, well, if there's two things that I should be really studying and learning about, it's, health, and then wealth and money. Because at the same time, I was getting really into Bitcoin and kind of like decentralized money. Again, this all frames the lens of losing control of, the things that are most important in our life. And for me, the health situation I was in really drove that home. And then I was looking around at everyone, and I realized we had outsourced a lot of these most important decisions and knowledge in our lives for convenience. And as a result, like the standard of living and the monetary system has really worked against a lot of average individuals. And then COVID happened, reinforced my stance, to a degree that everyone listening to this could probably understand. And from there, I just became hooked. I got really into the food system, regenerative agriculture. I wrote a book called Bitcoin and Beef. And then that was in 2021, came out in early 2022. And then after that wrapped up and I was promoting that for a while, I realized I had this opportunity as an electrical engineer to better understand the electromagnetic aspects of our biology, of health, of nature, because it's a bit of a complex topic. And I hadn't realized, I knew, again, I was grounding, I was turning my phone on airplane mode, I was wearing blue light blockers. Like I knew this stuff mattered, but I never took a super, super deep dive until about 2 years ago. And then as an electrical engineer, all of this stuff just made sense to me very quickly. And I kind of nerded out and have been studying this ever since and educating about it online, because I do think, again, having that baseline level of understanding from a background in electromagnetism and electrical engineering, really helpful. But I saw this gap, and now we see this trend of light and EMFs and grounding becoming not mainstream, but mainstream in the holistic health space or the alternative health space, which is amazing to see. And it all comes back to this common theme of my own healing journey, which was the more time I spent outside, connected to nature, connected to my local environment, the better I felt. And now I understand all the science, all the reasons why that's true. And the best part is 6-7 months ago, I now have a full-time job where I basically can apply those principles to an end product and solution working at the Daylight Computer Company, which, yeah, what a blessing for the opportunities I've had and everything I've learned over the past few years. So it's a real pleasure.
That's amazing. I love that story, and I love the message that we're like that I can pull from it that you shared again at the end, saying that the more time we spend in nature, the more regulated, the better, the more optimal we will feel. And on a simple term, we are nature, right? Think about what's going to grow better, a plant outside, rooted into the earth, or like something in a little jar inside. I mean, we can take care of our plants well inside, but it just feels so natural and easy for us to heal with the earth. Like the earth regenerates, right? Like you cut something down, you plant sidewalks, and stuff is growing through the cracks in the sidewalk. Like life wants to happen, and it's you cut down. I saw this tree that was like all the branches were cut off of it. And right now it's just growing and thriving. Like it's self-healing. We are self-healing. And so when we put ourselves in touch with the energies of nature, it becomes so much easier. So I do want to talk about, like, I'm definitely confused about Bitcoin. I definitely want to talk about that. I want to talk about that word decentralized that you used. And so we'll get to that as well. If anyone was kind of questioning, I think I have an understanding of what it is, but I'd love an explanation. But let's start with talking about stuff about electricity and this word electromagnetic. You said humans are electromagnetic. What does that mean? And how does it shape the way that we should be looking at our health practices and our environment?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. And again, these words can be like very intimidating, but I think starting with like a definition of like what electromagnetism is, what is the electromagnetic spectrum, what are electromagnetic waves? So basically, the electromagnetic spectrum is anything ranging from the electrical power in your house, which is oscillating at 60 hertz. If you're in the US, 50 hertz. And what is that? That's the frequency. So an electromagnetic wave has a frequency to it. It has a wavelength, and then it has energy. And it's comprised of photons. And photons as being packets of light, perhaps from, science class back in the day. So light is an electromagnetic wave. And it's called electromagnetic because it has both an electric field component and then a magnetic field component. So all of the electromagnetic spectrum is light. The power coming out of your outlet is also a form of light. It's just non-visible light. So that's where it gets a little tricky. And the visible spectrum of light, the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, UV light, on either side, or on one side and infrared on the other, which is non-visible to us, visible to some, of the biology on this planet. But that is like 1%. The visible light is 1% of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. So it's a very small sliver that we are designed as humans to take in as an input visibly. However, radio frequencies, microwaves, X-rays, these are all also part of the electromagnetic spectra. And some of this is reaching the surface of the Earth from the sun. A lot of it is being blocked by our atmosphere, our ionosphere. So it's not making it to the surface. And there's varying portions of the spectrum that do. So the way I like to categorize it is, there is native electromagnetic fields. And when we say fields, again, this is just referring to the specific electric field and magnetic field components. So like the light coming off of the screen right now is also an EMF. Also, so is the Wi-Fi, so is the electrical power. These are all EMFs. And you can categorize them as native EMFs, like they're of the earth, they're naturally here before humans existed, and we had no influence on their existence here. And then we have like non-native or artificial or man-made electromagnetic fields, and that would be electrical power, that would be radio frequencies, microwaves, etc. The natural electromagnetic fields would be sunlight, that's reaching the surface of the earth. in the manner that it is without kind of disruption or distortion through glass or man-made objects. Screens have kind of an artificial light spectrum, which we can talk more about later. And then we have like a native electromagnetic field, the geomagnetic field of the Earth. Because of its iron core, there's a strong magnetic field. There's electric fields from the Earth that are generated from lightning strikes. And that's also charging the negative surface, the electrons that we can tap into from grounding. So there's a lot going on here. But in reality, your question was, what does it mean for us to be electromagnetic beings? And it means that these are input signals to our biology, almost at the lowest level. So everyone likes to get hung up on like biochemistry and nutrients, macro, micro, vitamins, minerals, proteins. Like these are all tremendously important. But if we break it down to the subatomic particle level, we really have electrons, protons, and photons. And that's what's really running our biology at the lowest level. And the electromagnetic component of that is the photons, and then, of course, how it's interacting with electrons and protons as well. So for me, how I explain it as an engineer, and how I think about all of this is everything we're consuming on a daily basis when we're alive on this planet, we can treat it as input signals. And our body's taking these input signals and it's using them to optimize our systems, whether that's hormonally, whether that's our cardiovascular system, how we're feeling from a neurocognitive perspective. These are all like physically, metabolism, of course, as well. These are all being derived from the input signals that we give our body. And the output of our body, which is like our energy, our vitality, hormonally, how we feel, our emotions, our neurotransmitters, these are all dependent on the inputs. So what are the main input signals to our biology? Well, most people think the main inputs are like food and water because that's what we physically consume, which they are very important, extremely important. However, we only eat a few times a day. Maybe we drink water 10 times a day, but we're consuming light and electromagnetic inputs. So both visible and non-visible light, 24/7, 365 days a year. Like it's all the time we're consuming these electromagnetic inputs. And for me, that is the number one input signal to our biology, especially the light component that we can see, or you could say the sunlight component, because that's really what's setting the clocks, our circadian rhythms, and that's what's driving all of the systems in our body to function in synchronicity, to function as one whole unit that is optimally outputting what you need to thrive. And it's just like any other system. If you want it to be functioning at the highest level, you need it to be in sync, you need it to be working together, and you need to have the right inputs. So it's funny because we live in this world now in 2024 where we think we know everything about the human body, but we forget that the most simple things will always move the needle. And like I said earlier, I realized the more time I spent in nature and the more connected I was to my local environment, the better I felt. That's because we're designed that way. We've been designed, we've adapted and evolved over hundreds of thousands of years on this planet and all of biology for millions of years to thrive on the earth. As you said, we are nature. And what drives nature at the lowest level and is probably the most important input is the electromagnetic spectra and environment. So that's kind of a high level way of breaking it down. And to me, the input output kind of way of thinking about it just makes it really simple. But you don't have to teach this to someone 300 years ago or to an animal that's just living outside. They're just like in it. They're just naturally connected to their environment all the time.
That's so well said. Thank you for explaining that. So this electromagnetic spectrum is visible and invisible forms of light, which are frequencies. And I didn't realize that, yeah, all of it is contains photons, right? And the magnetism is still a little confusing to me, but basically, what my understanding is like the flow of, I guess, a positive or a negative charge would create a magnetic field. Is that how you would say that?
So yeah, so we have the magnetic field component, and then we have an electric field component. The magnetic field is a result of moving charges. So think of like the current that is powering a light bulb in your house. So
uh,
when you have the lamp in your house plugged in and turned on, there's current flowing to the light bulb. You have a magnetic field as a result of that, and an electric field. You have both. Whereas electric field is voltage. So it's the difference in potential. So if you just have your lamp plugged in, but you have no power running, like you don't have the light bulb on and no current flowing, you will only have an electric field. So you won't have a magnetic field there.
oh,
Yeah. So the
so
magnetic field
interesting.
piece is moving charges. And that's why the earth has this molten iron core, and it's moving. The molten iron is moving around, and those moving charges are generating the natural geomagnetic field of the earth.
So interesting. So let's talk about the difference between the electromagnetic fields that we experience outside and inside on our human physiology and our biology.
Yeah. So the native and then non-native EMFs, right? So what did I say is like the native EMFs? We have the geomagnetic and natural electric field of the earth. Those are very low frequency. The Schumann's resonance is like 7.83 hertz.
And
And
that means cycles per second, right?
yes, exactly.
Okay.
So hertz, like 60 hertz, just means there's 60 oscillations per second. And it's a vast difference between sunlight, which is in the trillions, hundreds of trillions of oscillations per second. And then your Wi-Fi is at 2.4 billion hertz, or sorry, 2.4 gigahertz, which is, yeah, 2.4 billion.
Wow.
So getting back to the low frequencies that are we're naturally exposed to. Yeah, they're 7.83 hertz. Everything in this realm of natural EMFs from the earth is in the low frequency range, like less than 20, 30 hertz. There's harmonics, which are just like a multiplicative of the 7.83 that gets weaker as it goes up in frequency. But those are typically capping out at, let's say, 30, 40 hertz. And we're not really exposed to much above that. And they're very weak. They're not super strong. And the electric field of the earth can vary between 100 150 volts per meter in some areas, and that's also at a very low frequency, and sometimes even static, which means like there's no oscillation component to it. So that's all we had for a while in the low frequency realm. And then we also have sunlight, which I said, what is naturally being exposed to us in the form of sunlight? Well, it depends where you are. It depends what time of day, but it's always the full spectrum of light. So we have red and infrared being very rich, and rich meaning they have a higher percentage of the solar spectrum in the morning and then in the evening. And as the sun gets higher, and the higher it is, depending on where you are in the world, what latitude you're at, and what season it is, you will get the full visible spectrum. You'll get the blues, and then you will get the violets, and then you get the ultraviolet. And if you are in the summer, like we are now, even at 44 degrees north where I am, I'm getting UVB, ultraviolet B, which is kind of the shortest wavelength of light that's typically making it through to the Earth's surface. So a lot of the other spectrum of the solar source is getting eaten up in our atmosphere, which is a good thing because it's protecting us. And what is cool about this is the natural magnetic field of the Earth is part of that protection. So the Earth's natural magnetic field is interacting with solar wind and all these charged particles forming the magnetosphere. And this is where a lot of the solar spectrum and kind of harmful radiation is getting eaten up. So that's something that is cool. This is a good thing that we are having a natural magnetic field. So the important points about the sunlight is you never get ultraviolet without everything below it in terms of energy. You never get ultraviolet without violet, blue, yellow, green, orange, red, and infrared. You never get blue without red and infrared and orange. You never get any of the high energy wavelengths, which have been touted as harmful for our biology, without the full spectrum. And this is the most important concept to grasp, is that sunlight doesn't give us things in isolation, only in the full swath of frequencies and wavelengths of the rainbow and the ultraviolet infrared components. And that's where you lose a lot of people, because they'll point you to studies saying ultraviolet radiation can cause skin cancer and all these things. But almost all of these studies are done in very unnatural environments and in isolation. So that's where the science doesn't match the context of how we live or how we should be living. And that kind of summarizes, we can go down that rabbit hole, but that summarizes the native electromagnetic fields. There is a tiny amount of like radio frequencies that sometimes makes it to the Earth's surface. But from my research, what I found is that if you put one cell phone on the moon, it would outweigh all of the native radio frequencies for the entire planet. And that is a good transition to talking about the non-native EMFs that we're exposed to, because basically these are frequencies, especially the radio frequencies, that are completely alien to our biology, right? Thinking of input signals. Our biology is designed to take in these low frequency native EMFs and then the sunlight, which are much higher energy. We can see a lot of that spectrum, and that's really having an impact on our biology that we're prepared for and we're using for fueling a lot of our biological processes. Whereas radio frequencies, they're in this weird middle ground where they're far higher energy waves compared to, let's say, the low frequency native magnetic field and electric field, but they're less. They have far less energy than sunlight, and this is why people always say, well, radio frequencies are non-ionizing radiation, or they're way weaker than sunlight, so there's no way they could have a biological impact. And this is simply like, the easy cop out for people. So ionizing radiation is anything that has enough energy to, completely disrupt a molecule and, cause it to become ionizing. And that's typically above the ultraviolet component. And ultraviolet is right there, right? So that's why it's always, touted as dangerous, which it can be if you overexpose yourself to, direct sun and you don't have a solar callus, et cetera. But this doesn't mean that radio frequencies are harmful or are not harmful because they're not in that bucket. In reality, there's thousands of studies now that show negative impacts of radio frequencies on biology. And a lot of it has to do with oxidative stress and the mitochondria, causing things like infertility, causing neuropsychiatric issues. There's like a whole list. And why would a radio frequency cause these issues? It's because, it's an unnatural input signal to our biology. We're not designed to do anything with it. It doesn't have enough energy to excite an electron to a higher energy state, but it has enough energy to alter the frequency of, the water in our biology or the electromagnetic aspects. So you asked me in the beginning, like, what does it mean for us to be electromagnetic? It means that almost every biological system we have is running off of electromagnetic components and signals. So we talk about, things that people can relate to. Our heart. How do you measure heart activity if you go to the hospital? You get an electrocardiogram, and that's measuring the electrical activity of the heart. And the heart is full. I don't know how much you've talked about mitochondria on the podcast, but these are really the core, we know them as, or the layman knows them as, energy powerhouse of the cell. They're really the most electromagnetic components of our biology. And the heart has the highest density of mitochondria, and thus it's the most like electrically and electromagnetically active area of our body, and rightfully so. It's extremely important, right? And they've actually done studies showing that our heart emanates a magnetic field outwards, feet, and you can measure that. So this is not like woo-woo science. You can take a piece of equipment and measure this if you have the right, kind of context and not anything interfering with that signal. And then the same thing with the brain, right? How do we measure our brain activity? We have an or an encephalogram, an EEG, right? So that's measuring your brain waves, which, funny enough, we talked about the Schumann's resonance, and that's at 7.83 hertz, which matches directly with your alpha brainwave. And the brain waves are ranging from very low frequency delta is like half a hertz to 1 hertz, to alpha is like 7.8, beta is higher than that, and theta is, I think theta is after that. They can go up to like 20-ish hertz. So that's where our biology is actually operating at, like a lot of low frequency kind of signals. So getting back to the non-native inputs, the radio frequencies, the electrical power at 60 hertz, everything in
Does
between.
radio frequency include like cell phones or because my mind just thinks like radio stations, but it's beyond that, yeah?
Yeah, so it started there, right? So the names here are kind of confusing. So you can have a microwave and you can have a radio wave. It's really just like the name. What's more important is the frequency. So funny
Mhm.
enough, your Wi-Fi, like I said, is operating at 2.4 gigahertz. So 2.4 billion oscillations a second is happening with your Wi-Fi, and your microwave oven is actually using the same exact frequency, or almost the same. It's 2.45. So what is the microwave doing to your food? It's oscillating the water molecules to a degree that it's having a thermal effect. So you can imagine we're 60 to 70% water. I don't know how many people on your show have gone down the water rabbit hole, but I highly
I talked a
recommend.
little bit about it with Carrie, but not
Oh,
too
yeah.
much. So yeah, go
If you listen
ahead.
to Carrie, that's a great introduction. She's amazing. Read Gerald Pollack's work. Water is really, you could argue, the most important aspect of our biology because it's the most, abundant aspect of our biology. It's 60%, 70%, depending on your age, your health status. Kids have way higher water
I think
content.
that's by weight, right? But by molecules, aren't we 99%?
There you go. You beat me. You beat me to
Oh,
the
okay.
next
Sorry.
round. No,
Sorry.
no, you're good. That's great.
Took it away.
So
Sorry.
you think of how a microwave is working. That means that water is having this effect from the radio frequencies, from the microwaves. Let's just all say from the non-native EMFs. And there's some cool research out there that proves this, that water is acting as an antenna in our biology. And it's meant to absorb frequencies and emit them. So these radio frequencies can have an impact there. I mentioned the mitochondria. The mitochondria have a voltage differential. That's how they power the ATP synthase, which is basically a mini nanomotor in our bodies. We have trillions and trillions of them, and that's what's spitting out ATP. It's actually being run off proton current, not electron current, which is cool. And that's all electromagnetism, right? And that can be disrupted by radio frequencies as well. We have like voltage gated ion channels, which are using charge differentials to regulate ion flows, calcium, potassium, sodium. You go down the line and you see, right, the brain, the heart, the mitochondria, these ion channels, these are all operating off electromagnetic aspects. And then we introduce a foreign electromagnetic input, and it's going to cause chaos, right? It's going to cause a lot of noise in the system. Now, we don't really know the full depths of how this is all happening, but we can understand that it's having an effect. And the way I like to think about it is it's just lowering the signal to noise ratio. And if you have disrupted communication in your body, you're going to have biological chaos. Like if your cells don't know where to go or don't know what to do and what, reaction to execute, they're going to, eventually have errors. There's going to be chaos, and biological chaos you could just call inflammation, right? At the end of the day. And that's what we're seeing with a lot of these studies, is that the typical outcome is some form of oxidative stress, loss of like redox, homeostasis. And that's why this whole argument of like antioxidants is really important. And we can talk about how grounding can play a role in that. But
Yeah.
we now have exposure to just so many radio frequencies, which, as you mentioned, this is our cell phones, this is our Wi-Fi, this is everything in the gigahertz, the megahertz range. And we never had any of this before 50 years ago, 60 years ago. This is all brand new. And, it's causing chronic fatigue. It's exacerbating other health issues. It's just causing communication and stress in our cells to a level that is now showing in a lot of the, chronic diseases that we're having. And the other, component of this is the electrical power that we've had for quite some time, but it's also a problem because this is in the range of 60 hertz, which is far closer to, our brain waves and where biology tends to operate. So that's more of like an electromagnetic interference, giving our body the wrong signal and directly being misinterpreted for what's going on. So it's easy to get neurotic about these things, but I would just recommend that understanding these are non-native inputs. They are affecting our biology. We're electromagnetic beings. We're all on the same page there. So what can you do to like avoid these, or what can you do to mitigate and, have abundant health is use technology in a smarter way, get outside, get connected to the native inputs, and really embrace the environment that you're in and just avoid the toxins. This is just another toxin. This is a toxin. Your Wi-Fi is a toxin. So if you have a chance to reduce your exposure, then turn it off, turn it on airplane mode. Distance is your best friend. So people need to grasp that electromagnetism, the most important component to know is that every, X amount of distance away from a device, you will have X squared reduction in the field. So if you just have your phone like 4 feet away from you versus like 4 inches, that could be like thousands of times difference in the intensity. So that's something to consider. And then if it's distance away and you're turning your Wi-Fi off at night, you're not sleeping with your phone next to your head, like 90% reduction easily, probably more in your exposure, which then goes a long way every day of the year. So sorry, I feel like I've just been talking the whole time. But
No, I love it. I'm a podcaster too, so I tend to have these long answers, but it's beautifully coherent and really comprehensive, and I love that. So to kind of sum up some things, we have native electromagnetic exposure from things like stepping on the earth, from the sun, and then we have those man-made, non-native ones from all sorts of devices, and there's different interference from whether it be the wiring in our walls, probably, and our refrigerator and things that are plugged in, and that they affect us on such a big way because we're constantly being sort of being exposed to signals of electromagnetic signals 24/7, right? So that runs the magnetism of these little subatomic particles are running our biology. They're informing our biology what to do. So, and they're giving that direction. So I would almost say sort of as a conductor of an orchestra. So if we're getting so many foreign signals, it's like a bunch of drunk people from the audience, going up and trying to like conduct the orchestra. They're going to, it's going to be chaos, right? And that chaos, it will convert that. It basically means inflammation in our body. We're not getting the right signaling. We're not getting the right, just things happening when they should. So maybe the hormone doesn't get released, the gene doesn't get turned off. And so this has huge implications on our health, even though it's like so tiny, we can't see it, we can't perceive it. And I love thinking about how you just said that our Wi-Fi is basically a similar signal to the microwave. If you put a steak in the microwave, it would really dehydrate. It would turn it to like a piece of leather. And this idea that these frequencies are very dehydrating to our body, they corrode that exclusion zone. And that exclusion zone keeps us really healthy. It keeps all that stuff out of our cells. And so when we have this lowered small exclusion zone, it just leaves us so much more susceptible to having all sorts of issues. It's like a chronic cellular dehydration. And a lot of people have histamine responses and things. That's a cell danger response from having, not enough voltage and redox and all that crazy stuff. So some of these words you guys may be listening and they're a little bit new, but that's okay. Like just keep picking up the little nuggets. It'll make more and more and more sense as you go. So I would love to talk about grounding. You gave us a bunch of great tips already about, the idea of getting distance from our electronic devices. Don't charge your phone in your room next to your head. I've heard you say on other podcasts, unplug things. Can you talk a little bit more about maybe any specifics about the details about what we can do inside, and then talk about grounding for us?
Yeah, for sure. Distance and duration and elimination of a source are like the way so distance is your best friend. Covered that already. Use speakerphone. I have like a tripod that I'll like walk around and take calls on. Just put it actually.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah. Also
I'll
forget.
dig up my old selfie stick from
Yeah.
2012.
Use the selfie stick if you have to take a video call, or wired headphones, for example, because they're using a different. They're not using a 2.4 gigahertz Bluetooth right next to your ears, and people argue that it's very low power. You'll hear this a lot from skeptics. Like you brought up the microwave. A microwave, yes, it's way higher power than your Wi-Fi, but the microwave's heating up your burrito for 2 minutes, whereas you're exposed to this for hours. I mean, most people walk around exposed to Wi-Fi every single day, 24 hours a day. They never get a break. And that's what I'm talking about here, is these low level stressors that add up as a toxic threshold. And then who knows what is going to like break the camel's back and put you over in a place of sickness or autoimmune issues or metabolic issues, and then eventually chronic disease. But if you can strip away the duration of the exposure and then the intensity by putting distance between you and the source, that is going to reduce your total exposure to these stressors over time, which is really important. So yeah, ungrounded appliances emanate an electric field feet outward into the room. So I would unplug anything that's not like in use that you don't need. And really getting back to the duration, prioritizing your bedroom is the number one recommendation, because when you sleep, and this is why circadian health is the most important aspect of our biology. You talked about the symphony and the orchestra. Those are all running in sync when our circadian rhythms are aligned to the Earth's natural, inputs, right? And how does sleep help us in terms of our health? This is when all of the day's damage, all of the cellular stress is being repaired and restored, right? And everyone's on board that sleep's important, right? But I'm telling you, it's more important than you think, because this is when apoptosis, autophagy, melatonin is a potent antioxidant, of course. And this is when all of that's happening. If you sleep in a hot room, in terms of like hot EMFs, like Wi-Fi is on, cell phones next to your head, you're in an apartment building with 45 networks, you're not connected to the ground, you're, have light exposure, it's not dark, it's not cool enough. You're sleeping, but you're not getting proper cell restoration because your body's never getting a break from the stressors. So do what you can during the day, but at nighttime, dial it in. Cut the Wi-Fi, cut your phone, airplane mode in the other room, buy some old analog alarm clock if you absolutely need it. Don't have 10 things plugged in the outlets. If you can turn the power off to your bedroom, then you're even a higher level. That's what I do. So my bedroom has no power, no electrical power running through the walls. You can measure that as well to see an impact. So your AC body voltage will be far reduced. If you don't do that, then don't sleep 6 inches away with your head from an electrical outlet. That can have a higher exposure. So the distance, again, there is playing a role. So, keeping the room dark and cool and light being blocked out, not staring at your phone, of course, getting into the blue light, disrupting your melatonin and your sleep, is imperative. So those are my recommendations. Now, you can do a lot more. You can go above and beyond and buy Faraday things, but those are debatably effective depending on the context. but just focus on removing sources that you can turn off, distance between you and your technology, and creating a sleep sanctuary. And all of this costs $0. Maybe you buy a
Yeah.
tripod, it costs you like $15 and, wired headphones, but you don't need a $5,000, harmonizer and all this fancy stuff. Like, the principles you can apply don't cost anything, and they are extremely effective. And then grounding.
Oh,
Yeah.
wait, I have one question before we jump into grounding. Thank you for all of that. I have a question about a fan. So I live in Texas. It's hot and I
Yeah.
sleep with the fan on. A fan, because it's spinning, that's going to create a field, right? And so is this contraindicated to sleep with a fan?
If you can't fall asleep because like it's too hot, then that's a problem. But I don't know, is it a ceiling fan or
The
like a
ceiling fan.
yeah, I mean, then you probably can't cut the power in the bedroom. But again, if that's like going to help you fall asleep, alternatively, you could buy like a stand up fan and run an extension cord. But yeah,
Okay.
I
Well,
think,
different things to experiment with because I want to try this. I have a feeling I know you don't like the word dirty electricity. I heard you say that on a podcast, but I have a feeling this house is not wired the
oh, yeah.
best. Like most of my outlets are not grounded, so I used a grounding tester. Most of them are not. That's why I tried a grounding sheet and I was like, okay, no difference. I probably should have tested that first. I was like, I'll just see if there's a difference and then I'll know if it's working. No difference. So, and then I realized that outlet wasn't grounded, but I want to try this cutting off the power to my room to see how it does, and maybe I'll just turn the air conditioner a little bit lower. I think I'll survive. Um,
No, that's what I do. I run the air conditioner from like whenever, let's say 7 to like 9:30, and then I cut it off, and then it's good. Or you can run an extension cord to your room and get a fan. The dirty electricity piece, it does matter, but again, like if you shut the power off, there's nothing.
yeah,
So like
yeah,
that's even better, right?
yeah,
It's important, but more important. Actually, the number one source right here is your phone. So if
yeah.
you, and then, the power in your bedroom at night. So if you use this in a more intelligent way and you're deliberate about your sleep sanctuary, then I think those are the big two things that, you have
Yeah.
to you tackle those.
I have one more question. You mentioned AC, meaning alternating current, I believe, and DC. So our power grid is alternating current, right? And then our bodies are direct current. So you mentioned you can measure your own alternating current, like, and that tells you how much you're being exposed to. How do you say this? I'm stuttering through it because I don't really know what I'm saying, but are you able to understand my question?
Yeah. So the best way to measure like the quantity of electric AC electric fields from the electrical power in your house or your room is to do what's called a body voltage test.
Okay.
So our body is naturally conductive. That's why like this is a problem. And again, that's why we're meant to like take these electromagnetic inputs. So the AC electric field will actually couple with your body and induce a voltage on your body, the surface of your body, and you can measure that. So if you go in a really like electrically heavy room, maybe the walls, like it's a small room, the walls are right there, you have appliances, you could have a AC body voltage of like 3 volts, which that's really, really high. And you want to bring that down as low as possible to, I mean, ideally less than 100 millivolts. I've pretty much, that's impossible unless you cut the power completely and have nothing plugged in. And even then, in my room,
Mhm.
it could be like 150 to 200, anything below 200. And you can measure this with any multimeter. Some of them don't go as granular on the AC level because typically anyone who's measuring AC voltage is like 120 volts,
Mhm.
240 volts. So you have to get a meter that has like the significant figures, the decimal points to get
Okay.
down below 1 volt. But yeah, our body is mostly running off of DC electricity or proticity. There's some frequency, there's some oscillation to it, but for the most part, nature is direct current, and that's why direct current. If we had power sources that were running off of DC in our homes, this would be a far better solution, right? There
Mhm.
is some effect of DC magnetic fields on biology, but it's far lesser so than 60 hertz or 50 hertz. So this is something that, like, if you asked me, Tristan, I had $1 billion, how would I design the power grid or design a home? I would be, let's assume the AC is the best way to still transmit power over long distances. Well, instead of having AC running into our homes and then having, the converter for your power, um, in the, like, charging, like, this is converting AC to DC so I can charge my laptop.
Oh
All of your
man.
electronics run off DC. Some
Mhm.
appliances do, but basically, I would design a whole industry around appliances that run off DC. I would bring direct current directly into your home, and that would be much lower EMF exposure. And some people are kind of doing that. I've talked to a few EMF nerds that geek out on DC. It can be a little bit more dangerous, so you need to have the right implementation in place. But here's something that's crazy is if we just had shielded wiring or conduit, so we used to, like, put steel conduit around a lot of wiring in our homes or shielded cabling, you would reduce 95% of the EMFs you'd be exposed to in your home. So then it actually doesn't even matter if you're AC or DC because you have a shielded cable. And that's just, like, again, if we acknowledge these things are problems, we can easily engineer solutions. It's not that hard. And that's
Yeah.
why it's frustrating to talk about these things because you just get dismissed. The electrical engineers, the physicists, they don't know anything about biology. And then the biology people don't know anything about electromagnetism. So there's this huge gap in interdisciplinary knowledge and multidisciplinary knowledge. And
Yeah.
that's where I live, is in between those worlds, where I know more than the biologists about electromagnetism, and I know more about biology than the electrical engineers, but I'm not an expert by any means in either field. So,
Right. But we need bridges like you because I'm a
yeah.
nutritionist and I'm trying to talk about electromagnetism and I'm trying to be a bridge as well, but I'm learning along the way. So let's finally dive into grounding. Tell us the importance of grounding and why it's so beneficial and how to do it. I know you have this good, better, best methodology as well.
Yeah, I'll try and remember what that is. I'm sure I'll just hit it from
You'll get it.
the
I'll
mind.
tell you if you don't remember.
But the yeah, grounding is really fascinating. Grounding or earthing. Someone commented on a post I made the other day. It was like, you shouldn't call it grounding. You should just call it earthing. I'm like, okay. It's basically when we are connected. Our human bodies are connected to the surface of the earth without adulteration or, an insulative surface such as our rubber soled shoes. Why is that important? That's important because the earth's surface is naturally negatively charged, which is a result of thunderstorms and lightning strikes, which is causing the earth to have a natural electric field as well. So the earth has this surface of free electrons or negative charges, and that's beneficial to us because our biology needs to be negatively charged. We need to have sufficient negative charge. How can people understand this? The reason why antioxidants are so important, such a health trend, is because all an antioxidant does is it donates an electron to an oxidant or a free radical, or a reactive oxygen or nitrogen species. You may have heard these terms before. Basically, those are molecules in our body that have an unpaired pair in their electron shell, and they really want an electron. So in order to get that electron, they're going to cause some havoc. They're going to cause cellular damage, and depending on which free radical it is, the severity of that different has a difference. So the antioxidants can quench that by donating an electron. And there's some antioxidants that are far better than others. There's ones that our bodies naturally produce, such as melatonin, such as glutathione, and these work really well. And then there's ones that we can consume via food. And the number one antioxidant, which is just electrons directly, is, can be received or kind of tapped into from grounding or earthing. So we're able to, because our bodies are naturally conductive and our skin is naturally conductive. And then when we sweat or the ground is wet, we have an increased conductivity, so we can absorb these free electrons from the surface of the Earth, and we can utilize them in our bodies to have sufficient negative charge and also quench free radicals and have this homeostasis, this redox homeostasis. And that is really the master antioxidant. And again, our bodies are running off of electrons, protons, and photons. If we cut off our main source of electrons, or one of them, in grounding and earthing, then we are going to have an electron deficiency. What is the other main source of electrons? Is our food. So we are able to break down food into electrons and protons. And we know the importance of electrons because the thing that our mitochondria is so important for is the electron transport chain, where we're shuttling electrons across the proteins to create a potential gradient to pump the nanomotor that we talked about earlier. And another good example of why this is so important is our blood cells, our circulatory system. So if anyone's seen some of the images or benefits of grounding and earthing before, you see this before and after of blood flow and blood cells. And on one side, the before, it's clumpy, there's a lot of blood cells sticking together. It's called rouleau, bad, poor circulation. And then the other side, really nicely separated blood cells, proper blood flow. Why is that? That's because our red blood cells actually use negative charges to repel each other so they don't stick together, and then we can have proper blood flow. That's directly on the red blood cell itself, which is called the zeta potential. And then the lining of the blood vessels also use charge repulsion to make sure that the blood flow is happening. And there's, a water component to it there, which is also a charge separation mechanism. You can get into the exclusion zone, but you wonder how our entire circulatory system, is able to quote unquote pump blood from the heart. Even though you get to a point where red blood cells are bigger than the capillaries, it's all about the charge, and it's all about the repulsion of charges and that electrical or electromagnetic component of it. So that's why grounding and earthing is fantastic for your cardiovascular system. It's a great natural antioxidant. And then it's also important as an input signal for our circadian rhythms, because one of the cool components that we don't even really conceive is that the cortisol regulation you get from grounding and earthing has also been proven. And how could that be? That means when we're directly connected to the earth, we are directly connected to our local environment. And then that's also improving our circadian rhythm and aligning the cortisol rhythm there, which is, the antagonist of our melatonin. So basically, when you're connected to the earth, you are improving your circadian rhythm. So you're going to get that symphony, that orchestra firing properly. You're going to improve the net negative charge of your body. Blood flow is going to improve. And then you're getting a source of natural antioxidants to quench any oxidative stress, damage from the toxins that you're exposed to. And then you can get into the water component where, you're charging your water battery, but, you can have another podcast on that.
Yeah, no, amazing. So well said. And I love what the benefits that I'm seeing from my clients who are incorporating grounding. I have a lot of people who have been super stressed. Maybe they're, over biohacking, or they're maybe females and doing things like skipping breakfast and doing cold plunges and, high intensity interval training and, all this great information out there that can be really helpful, but we're kind of like pushing too hard and, on top of already being stressed. And as you can see, just our indoor environments are so stressful for our human physiology. And so you helped, I think, a lot of people see how stressful it is for our bodies to constantly be inside, be disconnected from the earth that we evolved to be connected to. We always lived outside throughout our whole human history. And I don't know if you know Kelsey Dexter, but she was on my podcast. Yeah. And so she was talking about like the energy that came from above and came from below. Like, I love that visual that like we were always connected and tapped in, and now we're so cut off, and that's so stressful. So reconnecting to the earth regulates cortisol rhythms. Like, it's just not surprising to hear because I see it happening all the time. So what that looks like for a lot of my clients is they've had to, let's say, eat, 9 to 10 times a day because they feel like their blood sugar is crashing all the time. There's such a high stress load. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, I only had to eat 7 times today. Like I went from breakfast to lunch without being hungry. Like, I hear people say, like, this has never happened before. And so it's really, really regulating for them. And then pair it with the fact that we're outside getting the natural light signals. And it's just so regulating and calming to a very stressed system. So yeah, I love that it's free as well, and then the good, better, best, I think you just said, was like, the best would be being outside in nature. And then I think, uh, I guess I'm going backwards. Better would be that you're sort of plugged in to something where you're like, it's grounded maybe outside to like a grounding rod or something. And then good would be it's just kind of plugged into a grounded outlet. Is that
Yeah,
what you're
yeah,
saying?
that's the summary. Again, you
Okay.
got to test your outlets to even be grounded, but I'm not.
Hmm.
I think it's a tough one. I think people could probably benefit from grounding into their outlet, but it really depends on their EMF environment. I would always address, and people think that grounding is like a cure to EMF, and it's not. I'd actually be the total opposite. I think that you need to address your EMF environment first
Okay.
before you think. If you think grounding is going to get you out of like a really EMF laden room, that's you might actually be doing yourself worse because you're the path to ground then, and you're letting all of that kind of go through your body. This is the aspect that we don't really know. We're just making assumptions, and I would love to have more research on this, but to
Yeah.
me that's what makes sense. And the mixed anecdotal experience from people who ground into their outlet for me kind of verifies this, whereas everyone feels good grounding outside bare feet. And if you stick a grounding rod into your yard and then run a wire, you're isolating that circuit to where it's just the earth and you. Whereas you could be making yourself a part of the circuit of your house, which is, a 60 hertz circuit. So that's kind of the
Yeah.
catch there. But people might be so electron deficient that that still gives them a benefit. I don't know. So
Wow.
that's for you to find out.
Yeah, that's a really good call out though. So the idea is, don't try to think about, buying some grounding sheet and whatever. First, think about all the things that Tristan said about unplugging stuff, turning off your Wi-Fi and trying to mitigate some of these signals that are coming in. I have a question. So I have a tower within iShot over there. It's not
cell
the
tower.
what?
A cell tower.
A cell tower.
Okay.
And so when I'm outside in my yard and I'm grounded, is that helping?
Indirectly. Again, if that's causing you oxidative stress in your body, then you're just supplying your body directly with antioxidants from free electrons. However, again, the cell tower stuff is important. Yet, here's what I have to say: unless the cell tower is like 100 feet from your house, it's
Okay.
not a big deal. Your bigger
Okay.
problem is your phone, by far,
Okay.
because the phone is what's pinging the tower, and that is when you're getting the full output power of your device. When the tower is just there, like a few 100 yard, or maybe even a quarter mile, half mile away, that's enough distance for that to not be huge. Whereas
Okay.
if you make one cell phone call, like that's maxing out my, EMF meter. So what I recommend is, also I didn't mention this earlier, I almost never use my cellular data. I'm almost always just on Wi-Fi or it's on airplane mode because now you can call on Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is way
Mhm.
lower power. And then that's where the speakerphone, the tripod, the wired headphones are way better because the output power of a cellular call is, I mean, thousands and thousands of times higher than anything else that you'd be exposed to. Unless you have
I'm
like literally the tower in your front yard, then I'd be really concerned.
Wow, I'm so surprised. Okay, so turning off the cellular data and mainly using Wi-Fi. Got it. That's so interesting. So, I want to talk a little bit. We talked a lot about grounding and a lot of the light signals that we can't see, but let's talk about some visual light. So let's keep on the theme of the cell phone and how damaging this stupid thing is that we're all so addicted to, and maybe why some of the colors of these devices drive some of that addiction to these devices.
Yeah. This is one I've been researching a lot lately for daylight because it's to me like a two-headed monster, right? It's the blue light and the bright colors of our phones and our screens that's like priming us, and then honestly, the EMS play a component there as well because it's just lowering our kind of tolerance, and it's making us more susceptible to fall prey to the viral social media content, the marketing, the algorithm, the addictive, designed interfaces to keep us on screen. So really, I mean, this is the business model of big tech right now, is to basically hand you a Las Vegas casino in your hand and have that accessible at all times. You have bright flashing colors, you have this reward potential to where you tap something or you scroll, it's going to light up your brain, it's going to give you that dopamine reinforcement, and then you're going to have the algorithm taking the data for what you liked or what you spent more than 1 second consuming, and it's going to feedback that into showing you the content that matches that. So you're even more prone to staying on there and doom scrolling. So it's almost like the blue light has a dopamine, response effect to it far greater than any other light. Why? Because blue light is really important for our biology. It's
Mm.
actually the main input signal in terms of setting our circadian rhythms. The blue light is how our body tells time. We wake up in the morning, we get blue light in our eyes, our body knows what time it is. It knows to release cortisol, to wake you up, to suppress melatonin. It's the morning. Let's get started. Let's go outside and hunt or get accomplished what needs to get accomplished for the day. And at the same time, we have a neural response from a neurotransmitter perspective there. It's far more exciting to our biology, and that's for good reason. And now we have these screens that are blasting us with a distorted spectrum of light that's high in blue and very low in red and completely absent of infrared, which are, the more healing, low energy wavelengths. So we're getting this, dopamine casino in our hands, in front of our, eyes all day long. And now we're all addicted to our technology. So this is kind of the reality that we're in. And again, going back to the children are far, far more susceptible to everything that we are talking about on this podcast. They're more susceptible to any electromagnetic inputs because they have smaller body sizes, they have developing biology, they have higher water content, and they have a more sensitive and developing neurocognitive system that is taking these inputs and creating, circuitry and mental maps to optimize for that environment. So they're basically optimizing for an artificial reality. And the result in that is the mental health crisis that we see today in our teenagers and kids. And it's really a tragedy.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. So tell us about the daylight computer that you're working on and what makes it different and yeah, tell us everything about it.
Yeah, the daylight computer is still unbelievable to me that this is a real company and this is my real job now. But if you take all the reasons why modern technology is bad for us, so
Mhm.
highly addictive, like dopaminergic, the blue light, the distorted screens, like light spectrum, the EMFs, the fact that it keeps us inside is the biggest one for me.
Yes.
Adults
I was talking
spend
about that the other day. The fact that all the newer the technology, the more addictive it is, the more time we spend inside. Keep
yeah,
going. Yeah, for
90% of
sure.
our time, probably not you and I, definitely
Yeah.
not me, I know for
No,
sure.
definitely not me. I'm outside all day except for this podcast.
Yeah,
And I'm going right back outside.
we need daylight computer laptops so we can get podcasting going outside. But
Yes.
90% of our time, whereas we just talked about how we are designed to thrive outside. So we're getting 1,000 times less photon density in a distorted spectrum. That's why it's this dull day and it's these brighter nights, circadian rhythms disrupted, no grounding, no fresh air, no, something we'll could talk about in the future is the bacteria, the regional species pool that we're exposed to set the microbiome of our biology is
Mm.
really important. We live in a sterile, dull, artificial indoor life. And we really at Daylight Computer just set out. My founders worked on this for 6 years because he had a really bad relationship with his devices. Like he was ADHD, seasonal affective disorder hit him hard as an Indian living in Canada in the winter.
Oh, yeah.
And he just was like, my Kindle doesn't seem to have this effect on my biology in a negative way. And why is that? Because a Kindle has a reflective screen, which is not stimulating. You can use it outside, and there's no bright colors. It's monochrome, and it's just there as a tool to read. So he was like, and then went down a rabbit hole of screen technologies, ended up pioneering, inventing his own screen display technology with these Japanese researchers. So it's a reflective screen at the core, but then it solves the speed issue with a Kindle or a remarkable tablet to where it's now fast enough to be used for the internet, for downloading any application, for pretty much any modern task that you need to accomplish. And then the benefit is you can use it outside because it has a reflective screen. So it's working with nature instead of against it. The reason why you can't see your MacBook or your phone very well in direct sun is because you're competing against the brightness of the sun. So you see it really well inside because our lighting is very dull. Whereas,
Yeah.
outdoors can be 10,000 times brighter, which again, photon density is energy.
Yep.
And then the battery life problem. Take my MacBook outside, it'll basically implode in like an hour in direct sun, because when you're using a reflective screen, you actually have no light being emitted from the screen itself. It's purely acting like a piece of paper. So the output power is very low. The battery is not being super, super hard. So the battery life, if you're just reading outdoors, could be 50, 60 hours. That's the improvement. And then at nighttime, when you need light, we custom made an amber backlight. So it's 100% blue light free. And then simultaneously is flicker free. So flicker is a big
Amazing.
problem with LEDs. They're constantly cycling on and off or changing in amplitude, which is another stressor to our eyes, to our brain, to our biology. And we went to the hardware level to solve that. So you don't have to wear blue light blocking glasses. You don't have to have a red screen filter. It's an amber screen, which is much more pleasing to view, and you can use it at lower brightness. And then, you can use it outside. It has modified Android operating system. And the first form factor is like a tablet. It's called the Daylight Computer One. And we're just starting there, and we're really just looking to solve all of the issues on why technology is bad for us, get people back to the real world, which is
Mhm.
outside. Whereas all these big tech companies want to get you on your screen more in the metaverse, in the Appleverse, whatever it's called.
Mhm.
That is not how we solve the lack of synergism and the mental health and the chronic disease crisis. We can have our cake and eat it too in terms of technological advancements and having the knowledge of the universe at our fingertips. We just need to understand how to make it synergistic with our biology and with nature. And that's pretty much what we're doing. So it's so exciting.
Yeah, so exciting. Love it. Can't wait to get my hands on one. So, Tristan, this has been amazing. You are such a great speaker, and it's obvious you're a great podcaster as well. So tell us where people can find you, and where we can get in touch.
Yeah, on Instagram at Tristan_health, and then on Twitter or X, I'm at Bitcoin and underscore beef still. And you can check out the Daylight Computer at daylightcomputer.com. We are technically sold out for the year, but we're working hard to get more inventory placed. And you can always place a deposit to just get your spot in line. So Danny, thanks so much for having me. This was a
Yeah.
pleasure. Hopefully, people understood some of what I was saying. But the moral of the story is get outside, folks, get into the real world, get connected, and you will feel a ton better. It's that simple, and it's free and accessible for anybody to have.
Love it. And your podcast is Decentralized Radio, yeah?
Yeah, that is. I don't know how many new podcast episodes we're going to have, but we have a great backlog of amazing guests. If you want to learn more about this stuff, some
Yeah,
researchers.
I had Ryan on the podcast a little while back, so you guys are co-hosts. So, all right, awesome. Well, thank you so much, and we'll have to, I guess, talk about Bitcoin off air.
There we go.